Welcome back. Well, the Ferry ruling is the latest in a series of controversial court decisions in cases involving MPs who are strongly connected to the ruling NDP. Just 3 months ago, another NDP politician and businessman was acquitted over charges of supplying faulty blood containers to hospitals. Such verdicts have brought about skepticism amongst the Egyptian public. Many see it as an undeclared marriage of convenience between ruling party politicians, MPs and businessmen. The Egyptian judiciary is considered the last bastion for justice. Judges have often fought against government corruption. Back in 2005, thousands got together in Cairo to demand greater autonomy from the government. But recently, there's been an increasing focus on scandals involving bribery and corruption in the courts. Judges are often assigned to cases based on previous performance in order to predict the verdict. Also, a rising number of former police officers have been recruited into the judiciary. This has led some to doubt their impartiality. Well, we're still joined by our guests in Cairo, Ghada Shahbandar, in London, Robert Springboard, and also in Cairo, Rida Thabit. Mr. Thabit, looking at Egypt in a broader sense, would you say that those who believe that the judiciary is far from independent have some claims to that argument?
It's hard to say that, because as you mentioned, one glaring instance of trying to illustrate a marriage of convenience between power and politics, the case of the tainted blood. That case of tainted blood, in fact, I was surprised it was even prosecuted. That case was really involving an administrative contract for the supply of blood, I don't know exactly, blood bags, blood samples, whatever it was. It was a contract, supply contract. And that contract, if the supplier, violated the condition of the contract, all the government could do is to confiscate the letter of guarantee and fulfill the contract at his own expense, as the law requires. But in that instance, they went and prosecuted the man for God knows what crimes he committed. It was violating a commercial contract. So really, I doubt that theory that there is a marriage of convenience between members of parliament and you know, the corruption and all that. I really doubt it.
Okay, let's pose this to Ghada Shahbandar. Sorry to interrupt you. Ghada Shahbandar, Mr. Thabit doubts that there's a marriage of convenience and that the system is broken. What do you think?
No, I tend to disagree. In our experience in monitoring the parliamentarian elections of 2005, many of the results were fraudulent. At that point, the Egyptian judiciary was overseeing the elections process. It no longer does that by virtue of the constitutional amendments of 2006. However, there have been many court verdicts that the election of certain members of parliament who continue today to be members of parliament is fraudulent or was fraudulent. And in 2006, members of the judiciary campaigned for the independence of the judiciary and for the separation of powers. Legislation and the constitution allows for government interference in the judiciary. We have repetitively demanded that it be amended and not allow for that. We have a Minister of Justice who has a lot of authority over the judiciary and is a member of the cabinet, is a member of the government. No, our judiciary is not completely independent. We do demand independence of the judiciary and separation of powers. The elections that give us our present parliament were on many instances fraudulent, and the court verdicts pertaining to that fraud have not been respected by the parliament, because legislation says that the parliament at the end of the day has complete authority over its members. So the judiciary can claim or can pass a verdict that a member of parliament is in his position by virtue of fraud, and the parliament can overrule the judiciary's verdicts.
Mr. Springborg in London, sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Shahbandar. Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry for that. Let's go to Robert Springborg. Do you concur?
Well, broadly, yes. I think since this critical election back 2005, 2006, the judiciary, the court system more generally, became a battleground between the government and the opposition. The judges were critical figures in leading the charge to rein in the power of the executive branch. And so the executive branch reacted very strongly. The nomination of that particular Minister of Justice that Ms. Shahbandar just referred to, various incentives and disincentives applied to the Judges Club. And now what seems to be decisions taken by courts that do reinforce the power of the executive broadly and the standing of its friends, such as the owner of the Salam Ferry Company. All of this adds up to discrediting the courts, suggesting that they're not autonomous, suggesting that real issues of justice and law are not being applied fairly and blindly, but are being applied within the context of executive control. And what is absolutely vital to the effective functioning of a legal judicial system is that it's seen to be impartial. And outside observers, I can attest to from those here in London, do not believe that the system of justice in Egypt is any longer impartial.
Rida Thabit, both the two other guests are painting a pretty bleak picture. I mean, incident after incident seems to be discrediting the courts, according to Mr. Springborg. Your response?
My response is, this is, as I said, this is a decision by the lowest level of courts in Egypt, the district court. I may agree with what Ghada was saying about, considering this killing, the negligent killing of 1,084 people to be a misdemeanor. I think the law should be amended, and I think it's appalling to treat this crime as a misdemeanor. This should be a felony, definitely a felony. Should be punished by imprisonment for at least 10 or 15 years, but not misdemeanor. Misdemeanor means it is at the same level of a traffic violation, of a speeding ticket.
But Mr. Thabit, would you agree that, say, for instance, the courts seem to be perfectly capable in cracking down on alleged extremists or those the Egyptian government says are aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood, but when it comes to innocent civilians dying, suddenly it has to go from court to court?
It's hard to comment on that because, as you know, I spend a lot of time in New York. I work in New York, so I'm not following up closely with all these things happening in Egypt, like, the opposition movements and the unhappiness of the judges or some of the judges. So really, I can't comment on that because, as I said, I spend a lot of time in New York, my office in New York.
Okay, let's bring in. Okay, so let's get Ghada Shahbandar to comment on that. Do you have two different types of legal systems in Egypt, depending on how it suits the regime?
Well, for starters, I'd like to say that in spite of a problem with the independence of the judiciary and our demand that our judiciary become totally independent, by and large, we have faith in the judicial system. We have no problem with the verdict that was passed yesterday. We have a problem with the legislation pertaining to that. And the public attorney and the public prosecutor has a problem with that verdict too. However, let's go back to the picture of judiciary in general. When you say the extremist fundamentalists, Islamists are tried very quickly, they're tried in different courts. We have been living under a state of emergency for almost 4 decades now. That state of emergency was only suspended in 1980 for a brief period that ended with the assassination of President Sadat. However, for the past 27 years and since 1981, we have been living continuously under a state of emergency, and there are exceptional courts and exceptional prosecution that try political opposition and people involved in terrorism. Again, we have a stance against these exceptional courts and exceptional legislation and prosecution. We think that the traditional judiciary of Egypt should be in charge of trying each and every citizen of this country. We believe that the state of emergency has to be terminated immediately, and unfortunately it has been recently renewed. So we have more than one level of judiciary in Egypt, and that is very unfortunate, and we have a stance against that.
All right, Rida Thabit wants to come in there. Go ahead.
No, I just agree with Ghada is saying about, we should have one judicial system only, because we have kind of three systems. We have the normal system, and we have state security courts that, and then we have military courts. And some of the extremists, as you refer to them, will refer to military court. And other cases they refer to the state security court. So I think I agree that we should have only one legal system.
All right.
And that everybody should be tried before that, the normal judiciary and normal judge.
Okay, let's get some thoughts. Judge. Okay, let's get some thoughts from Robert Springborg. Transparency International ranks Egypt as one of the most corrupt countries in the Middle East and North Africa region. Is Transparency International being too harsh on Egypt? And if it is vindicated, what needs to be done to reverse this trend of nepotism and corruption?
Well, Transparency International may be a little too hard. It's true to say that their measures are subjective rather than objective, and there are certainly worse offenders in the Middle East, worse than Egypt. But that doesn't say that Egypt should be excused for corruption or violations of the rule of law. And what has happened, as I suggested earlier, and as other two speakers agreed, there have been a lot of setbacks to the rule of law, to the independence of the judiciary and the courts over the past 2 or 3 years. And this is part of a broader political context, and it's that broader political context that really has to be addressed. That this is a government and a regime more generally that is completely and utterly dedicated to the power of the executive over all other branches of government and over all political activity in the country. This is excessive. This is what really lies at the basis of the problem of this particular case involving the tragic sinking of this ferry. And so it's a very broad political question here that needs to be addressed, and there are many forces in Egypt that are trying to address it. But this executive branch is, at the present, really quite intolerant of any sort of even legal opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure hearing your thoughts. We have run out of time. Ghada Shahbandar in Cairo, a member of the Board of Trustees for the Egyptian Organization for Human Rights. Also in Cairo, Rida Thabit, an international lawyer. And in London, Robert Springborg from SOAS. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you so much, the viewer, for joining us here on Inside Story. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.